interesting webinar planned for today, and I'm going to get through the catheter-associated urinary tract infections. A little background: I was introduced to this topic through friend and colleague Mary Hassler, who works at the Hennepin County Medical Center, and she put together a great presentation along with her colleagues you see on the screen, and is very interested in sharing the story. Now, a little background information. As normal, we do some housekeeping rules. Please use the chat function, and we can answer questions that way, and open it up at the end when we have some time to chat. This webinar is being recorded, so for those of you that want to share it with others, you'll be able to do so. And I want to get into the presentation a little bit here. So as I mentioned, I talked to Mary Hassler at Hennepin County Medical Center, and this was the plan. Plan A was to keep calm and prevent CAUTI, and understand how they had done some work at Hennepin County Medical Center. But as you know, and anybody who works in healthcare knows, that things can happen. So yesterday, I learned that the Friends at the Joint Commission were going to show up at Hennepin County Medical Center. And some of the key presenters, of course, needed to focus their attention on dealing with that situation. So now we're on to Plan B. And so what happened is I talked to the presenters about this. They've agreed that they're going to give this presentation in the future. They just need to let the Joint Commission situation pass for them, and then we'll reschedule in the future. However, I thought that we could talk about what they will be talking about when they have their presentation. So today's webinar is probably going to be shorter than what you planned. Maybe you'll be able to use the time for other purposes, but this is the outline of what Mary and her colleagues were planning to talk about today. And what I'm going to do is relay a little bit of that information, so that when they do reschedule it, you'll have more information about what they're going to be talking about. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the setting and the background, the problem that they were working on and trying to solve, as best as I can describe it. Again, when they do the full rescheduled webinar, they'll be able to explain that in more detail. And some of the early attempts at using some A3s and A3 thinking. And that's as far as I'm going to take it today, because the real work is something that they did, and I want them to be able to share it with you. So here's a little bit about the setting. If you're unfamiliar with the healthcare in the Twin Cities, Hennepin County Health System is a level 1 trauma center. It's a large facility located in downtown Minneapolis, right next door to the new stadium, the U.S. Bank Stadium, where the Minnesota Vikings and other teams play. So you may be familiar with that. The story that the folks want to share took place in the surgical intensive care unit. And so there's some information about that surgical ICU. They shared a little bit about their journey on the, call it the lean journey, and toward continuous improvement, their experimentation and where they're at, and then specifically highlighted in red how they got involved, and how the surgical intensive care unit was working on the problem and trying to solve a problem related to catheter-associated urinary tract infections. So some data. They shared this with me, and we're planning on sharing it with you, and I'm sure they're going to share it when they do their rescheduled webinar. The problem had to do with their performance on catheter-associated urinary tract infections, and this is some benchmark data comparing their performance against some other facilities also in the Twin Cities. And more specifically, looking at the performance over time, they saw that the rate was improving. And so questions that came about was, why would we need to improve? We are making improvement. But there was a realization that they had hit a plateau, and making more headway on this process was going to be a challenge, and just pursuing it in the methodology was not going to get them where they wanted to be. So new thinking was required. So they did some early attempts at attempting to use A3 problem solving, and some bit of information about that work here. The work was driven primarily by a committee. They focused on the protocol. The feeling from the staff and the unit was they were being told what was wrong, focusing on doing things the wrong way, and resistance. The use was at the 70% goal, but they were not getting to where they wanted to be toward their goal. And so they wanted to learn more about what they could do differently. And they really did go about some innovative work, some innovative changes that they're going to be sharing with you. And as I said earlier, because of the timing of the Joint Commission survey, they're not able to do it today. But we will be talking about the rescheduling. They did share some slides with me as far as how they went about making the improvement. But I'm not going to share those today because it's their story. But it's a bit like this cartoon here where a miracle occurs. And of course, the one character in the cartoon says, I think you should be more specific here in step 2. So this group will be talking about step 2, what they understand the importance of this. They did share the results that they've achieved, and they're quite impressive. Some substantial improvement. Again, looking at things quite a bit differently and taking different course of action. Not to say that the A3 methodology wasn't working, but they had to understand a little bit more about what was going on and what they really needed to do to get the fundamental change in the behaviors that they were trying to get. So a little preview to the results they're going to be talking about. And as I said before, because of the Joint Commission timing of their survey, which can't be dealt with, we can't tell the Joint Commission not to show up. And I'm sure the Joint Commission is going to hear about this story today, and they'll be very pleased with the work that the facility has been done. So the group will present, but they're going to be presenting in the future at a date to be determined. A few things to think about and learn about as far as what we plan for the next couple months. We will be doing a presentation on November the 17th on a recent white paper. We call it side-by-side management, and talking about that. You can read about the white paper by going to that URL there, but be unpackaging the concepts in that white paper on November 17th. On Friday, December 8th, Dan Markovitz, great presenter and great thinker, has written a couple books. I highly recommend the book that he talks about, Factory of One, to people that are trying to think about personal Kanban standard work. And he's written a new book that he's going to be talking about some of those concepts on December the 8th. As I mentioned before, the people who were going to be presenting today, a date to be determined. I gave you a preview about what they were trying to solve, the great results that they did. So you'll want to be able to listen to that and learn about that to find out what was that step 2 that they took that really did yield those results. Some topics that are in the works. So I've got a presentation lined up, not yet a date. Kevin McNamara, CEO at Tidy Products, all of you, sometime in 2018. Did a presentation with Katie Anderson. You may be familiar with her work, and I've titled it Daily Intentional Practice, but she is going to agree to do a webinar in the future. We have yet to talk about the date and time for the actual webinar. And then some friends at Sandoval Regional Medical Center who have been doing some wonderful work. Talked to a few of them about how they've applied these principle-driven transformation topics at their organization. Corrine is the Vice President for the Human Resources, and Melissa, and they've got for people to share what kind of topics they would be interested in for 2018, and if we don't have any topics to talk about, we'll shut it down and give you extra time to finish your work for the day. So I'm going to pause and see. The main question is topics of interest for 2018 people may want to talk about or share personal stories or organizational stories they would like to share with others. So typically when I have a long pause of silence, if I don't hear from anyone for a while, I take that as a cue that say people would like to have the webinar sign off, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. A copy of the recording will be going out to those on the distribution list. Apologize we weren't able to present the presentation that we had planned, but again, who can count on when the Joint Commission is going to show up? So I appreciate your time today and looking forward to our next conversation in November. Thanks a lot.